Every time I sing this song, I hope it's the last time. This is the story of the Trojan War. What drove them to fight with such a fury? We think of ourselves. Not me. I'm not like that. I'm a peaceful, but it happens anyway. There's just some trick in our blood. Do you see?
I don't often get a chance to say this, but I'm with the entire cast of a production that is playing in the Altcall Theater here at Playhouse Square. It's An Iliad, based on Homer, playing now through Sunday, February 10th. And with me are Tara Flanagan, co-director and the poet, and Ava Rose Scholz-Carlson, who is the composer, cellist, who is on stage as the muse. Tara, you have an involvement with this production, and Ava too, that goes back just to 2017. This is a recent production for you, but it's based on an adaptation of the Iliad that was worked on for 10 years, right?
Correct. The playwrights Lisa Peterson and Dennis O'Hare are friends and collaborators. Lisa works mainly as a director, and Dennis O'Hare is an acclaimed stage, film, and TV actor. So my understanding is that they collaborated on their adaptation of Robert Fagel's translation of the Iliad for over 10 years, starting in the early 2000s, and it premiered in 2012. And over the course of those 10 years, they worked with Homer's epic poem, but they took their inspiration from those original bardic poets who would travel the country singing the song of the Trojan War, adapting and adjusting the story for the particular communities for whom they were performing. So that idea of the poet really communicating with the people in the room, finding new metaphors and new examples to make the story alive and present and relevant to the particular audience. So that gives this version of An Iliad a really contemporary feel that I think our audiences will be able to hook into right away. But the genius of what they've done is that it is very much rooted in the original tradition of the Iliad.
The idea of one actor portraying, is it 54 characters?
Somebody gave me that count at one point. I'll have to go back and do the math, but it is, yes, dozens and dozens of
It sounds
people.
like a radical concept, but it really goes back centuries.
It's just pure storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a great story, an actor, and an audience, and that's where theater exists, is in that conjunction between the three of them.
So we have a woman portraying Achilles and Agamemnon and all of the figures of the siege of Troy. What is that like for an actor?
Well, it's interesting in this case, in this production, because I am a female actor. Yes, it will be a woman portraying all those characters. This play has certainly been performed by men as well, people of all ages. As a female actor, it's a really special opportunity for me. Andrew Carlson, the co-director, often talks about how traditionally in stories of war and conflict, the universal character is presented by a male. And yet, of course, if a character is meant to be universal, it could just as easily be inhabited by a female actor. But for me, it's pretty unique to have an opportunity to explore and showcase the full range of my humanity. Very often as a female actor, you're relegated to something more limited. And not that that's bad, that can be really interesting, but it is so freeing.
Achilles is an angry guy.
Is angry.
And you get to portray his rage.
Sure, and women, being human, are capable of being twisted by rage and grief and corrupted by power, as well as ennobled by love and empowered by friendship. And so it is important for all of us not only to recognize that, but to witness it. I don't feel like I have any kind of agenda as a female actor. I just try to honor the story to the best of my ability. sensibility, and it gets filtered through my humanity. But I've been really moved by many of the reactions of audience members, both male and female, their reactions to seeing something like rage or conflict be filtered through a female voice, a female lens, if you will. I've been very interested to hear their reactions.
One more amazing element of this production is that the other person on stage, Ava Rose Scholz-Carlson, is the muse, and you are also the composer of the score. These are themes associated with various characters. How did you do that?
So it was a really fun process. When we first did the show, I was just finishing my sophomore year in high school. And I had never done anything like this before or thought of myself as a composer
This
at all.
is 2017.
Yes.
You were finishing your sophomore year in high school.
Yes.
I'm just underscoring that for people who are listening.
Yeah. So now I'm in my senior year at Southwest High School, Minneapolis. I really had to kind of invent the process as I went. I knew going in that since I was just using my cello, I wanted to figure out as many different sounds as I could make that weren't kind of the traditional way that it's used. So that was the first thing I did. I just spent a while exploring all the different sounds I could make. And then I got some kind of notes from Tara and Andrew, who was the other director, about like some of the moments they knew they wanted. And then going in, a lot of it really did just happen kind of in the room. And we figured out that we wanted themes for the different characters, like Achilles and Hector, and things like that. And so what I did was came up with a beat for each of the characters that was just like a rhythm that I could drum on my cello. And so that kind of underscores a lot of things. So like for Achilles, the beat for that one is this. So then once I had that, I just started kind of playing around on my cello, improvising over the top of that until I came up with a theme that I liked for the characters. Once I had that theme, used it like sometimes plucking my cello, sometimes bowing it. So the one that went along with that Achilles beat is this.
That's a good theme.
Thank you.
That is a good theme. So is the muse commenting musically, underscoring some of the spoken word at the time that it's spoken, or are you playing connective material in between constant narration that the poet is doing? Or do you do both?
There's some of both. It's mostly underscoring. There's a lot of kind of using the beats to underscore when it's when it needs to be kind of less obtrusive. But yeah, it's mostly underscoring. Sometimes the muse's role is to kind of lead the poet into the next section. So sometimes I will kind of start with one of the themes and that will lead the poet. And then sometimes it's just kind of underscoring the story that the poet is telling.
Do the two of you have any interactions as human beings on stage?
We do. Some of that is scripted, but very little of it is scripted. And even the stage directions are fairly ambiguous and open to interpretation. The muse acts as muses do, so certainly as the inspiration for the poet. But then the other aspect of muses is that they are the keepers of knowledge. And so when our poet gets off track, when our poet gets sidetracked, if our poet gets lost, the muse is there to either encourage or provoke or whatever she needs to do in order to get me back on track. And that continues to evolve.
Well, high school seniors often feel that they're fountains of knowledge, so I think that's you're well cast. We are in the midst of a war that's going on for 18 years now. That's longer than the siege of Troy. What does this play say about humankind's perpetual capacity for conflict and violence?
That's such a good question. That is certainly the business of the play, is to attempt to grapple with that. As you say, our country has been involved in a conflict that has existed all of Ava's lifetime, as long as she's been on the planet.
That's right.
When they first started working on this play, it was in the year after 9/11, and so Dennis and Lisa couldn't have predicted that we would still be embroiled in these conflicts this many years later, but I think they seek neither to glorify nor to point fingers of condemnation at anybody, but to come to terms with the fact that it is part of human nature this propensity towards violence, this tendency to give in to rage when afraid or threatened or grieving. I think it does two things. It reaches out to the audience, not to condemn, but to ask us all to take responsibility and to seek our consciences or maybe our imaginations for a path beyond war, beyond conflict. Although it is a story that focuses on war primarily, there are little islands within the play of domesticity or creativity or peace or reverence for life, or somebody in the midst of rage choosing in that moment to release it rather than to give into it. And so there are alternatives offered, and there are other aspects of humanity celebrated. I appreciate that as somebody who sort of gives myself credit for being very nearly a pacifist, that I'm just not allowed that luxury, that I am forced to confront my own human nature, and that I'm allowed to give myself credit for things when I live a very comfortable life that for the most part has been almost devoid of any violence. I haven't had to live in the midst of war. I haven't been subject to great poverty, and yet I know what road rage is. You know, there are these examples given that anybody can hook into where you have to face your own humanity. And so it's more about a reaching out and a seeking for something beyond, while acknowledging that this propensity exists within all of us. Another sort of parallel thing that I think this play allows, which I've come to appreciate later, is the fact that the Greeks had built into their culture a way for the people who fought the wars and were impacted by war to have their stories heard by the general population, perhaps celebrated by the general population, but that we don't necessarily have that mechanism built into our own society. And yet for 20 years, we've been asking our young men and women to go off and fight and die in our name. And so we've been looking for ways to partner with veterans groups, with refugee groups in our different productions, so that we can bring their stories into the conversation and let this play be a springboard for larger conversations about war and conflict and the human cost and the human responsibility.